Okay, Tanya, so what? But before we get to Tanya, so what? Let's get to our Yom Yom, so what? The eve of Tu B'Shvat. Our holy forebears, the Rebbe, the Rebbeim, aside from their evoking divine mercies on behalf of their Mikushorim, those who are tied to them, also had an avoida of bringing the Mikushorim to mind, just thinking about them and pondering their reflective affection and attachment to the Rebbe. Just thinking about the Hasidim, each one individually. This has the effect of arousing the innermost powers of the individual of whom the Rebbe is thinking. As we see clearly, when one looks deeply and intently at another, even though a person could be walking down the street backwards and you're thinking or gazing, there's a vibe, a vibration that goes out and it touches the person, and the person returns the glance because the penetrating gaze awakens the core of the soul. Thought has the same effect. Good. Thought is real. It makes stuff happen. Okay, and with that, we'll go to Lessons in Tanya. New chapter, chapter 24, page 312. So, having spoken at length and come away with all the bechains that we have about the supreme unity, a unity which is unlike any other unity that we can engage in when we engage in Torah and mitzvahs, because mitzvahs are Loshen Savta B'Chibur, that's connecting with God, and Torah, God put His very essence into the Torah, as we're going to see this week's Parsha, Matan Torah, when He said, Anoichi, Ana Nafshi Chasvis Yahavis, I gave my very self into the Torah. So having spoken about that supreme unity, which is the side of Kedusha, we're going to now turn and talk about the things that make it difficult or interfere with our achieving that state of unity. Vela umazeh. There's an opposite side, chapter 24. Vela umazeh. There's an opposite side to Kedusha. We've talked about it before, the sitra achra, the other side. And hein shesah mitzvahs leisaseh. These are the things that the 365 mitzvahs that you shouldn't do tell us to stay away from. Shesah mitzvahs leisaseh of the raisa, but called isuri de rabbanim and all the isurim de rabbanim. All those things, the topic of all those things that we have to stay away from are things which are in the domain of the sitra achra, the other side. And that other side, what we call other, because shehein neged ratzei v'chamasiyas barak, because they are against and opposite God's will and His blessed wisdom. The hofchon mamish, and they are mamish the opposite. Him nefradim yehudiyas barak. If what we had been talking is about achdus and union with Hashem, this is the opposite, achra, separation. Something totally opposite, separate from the unity and the oneness of Hashem Yisborah, but tachlis hapurid, with a complete separation, mamish. Now, of course, this needs to be tempered because there is nothing separate from God. But the experience, if the experience of Torah and mitzvahs is an experience of chibur, of joining in, hiskalalis, this is the experience of separation and separate domains. Purid. Just like the clippers themselves, clipper is a shell, right? It blocks the truths and it separates one from the truth. So these clippers hanikra avodah zora. They're called avodah zora. Now we usually call, and we rightfully translate avodah zora idol worship, but it literally means a strange service. So instead of the avodah of kedusha, this is the avodah, the service, because people can get very wrapped up in this, in the service of something which is zora, which is strange. It's called avodah zora, and it's called other gods. Because of the concealment of the face, or the concealment of the panemius of the supernal will, as we spoke about above. previous chapters. So there's a separation at the core, not the core of the core. I mean, this is our safety net and our hook to kedusha is the godly soul, which is of course rooted much deeper than this. But this is the cause of the separation, that we're built this way. We have this animal soul and a yetzer hara, and it's possible for that to bring us to the point of actually feeling, understanding, and even living either that there is no God, or that the God has created agents, which he has done, the mazolas, etc. And since they are governing over certain domains, let me speak to them, ask them. This, by the way, is the whole degradation of godliness, of unity of godliness and idol worship is explained in the Rambam in precisely this way. Just like there's a Kaiser, a Caesar in Rome, and the Caesar delegates governors in the different provinces. So if a person has a problem, you don't go to the Kaiser, you go to the governor, the one who's directly responsible for the state. And that's how the world fell into, as the coverings got deep after the sin of the Yetzer Das and the darkness fell upon the world. So there was a darkening out of the light, let's say, of the celestial palace where God sits. And what was shining was just the light of the governors of the provinces, so to speak. And then therefore one turned to them. And they are called Elakim Achera, gods. They have power, but they're other powers, and not just other, but achra. They're on the backside. Machmes Hesteponim, as he says, the cause for it is the concealment shel ratzon elyon. As the world got darker, starting from the Yetzer Das Tevera and multiplying with many other transitional states into darkness, so the truth became darkened, and the agency, which was closely responsible, became more present. And that's the root of Avodah Zorah. Likewise, so the klippas themselves, the spiritual forces up above became predominant, and they start having the influence on the gimel klippas of the nefesh, the three the gimel levushi hanefesh, the three garments, thought, speech, and deed of the nefesh abahamis, the animal soul, shema klippas nager, which comes from this light klippa. In other words, the power is, and so I said before that it doesn't. This avodah zorah doesn't necessarily deny the existence of God himself, but acknowledges there is a God, but the God-created agents, and the agents are the direct link that I have to them. I don't have this direct link to God anymore because of the klippas, which are thickening the darkness. And so my thought, speech, and action is now associated with this klippas niger, with this light klippas, should be Yisrael, that's in a Jewish person, which is the thought, speech, and action of the engagement in the things that one shouldn't be engaged in, which are represented by the 365 negative commandments of the Torah and the Rabbanim and also the essence of the soul itself, meaning the animal soul, which is enclosed in these garments. They're all, the thought, speech, and deed of the animal soul are united. Right? We've used this word united. There's a yichud over here, but it's the yichud of the sitra achra, the other side, in the sitra achra, the klippas. Hanikra avodah zorah, which is called the service of something strange. I mean, I'm just saying that these are the literal words, but it manifests itself, the service of something strange, no matter what that strange thing is, whether it be the taivas of the body or whether it be a full-fledged idol, is called idol worship. Well, and not only that, these garments become bottle, nullified to the klippas in the sitra achra. And they are, the garments, when they become nullified to the sitra achra, they're worse than the sitra achra itself. Ma'oid, very much. Why? Because the klippas, the true klippas, that their root, before they're invested in the soul, of the animal soul, These clippers are spiritual things at their root before they're invested in the physical body of a person. And these clippers, they know who the master is. The governor in the province knows that he takes orders from the Kaiser in Rome, Lahavdil Elef Havdolas, right? They know who's their boss. And they don't rebel against him at all. Lifoil, to do anything independent, lifoil pu'ulosab b'mashlaches malachei haroyim shalor. They don't do, when they send out their messengers, even the evil messengers, the ones who are being sent out to test or punish, etc., or trick, all of this, they know they're doing this at the command of God. Right? God is the one who delegates the responsibility, if you could say such a thing, and they know who the delegator is. They only do, the clippers, these are the spiritual clippers, they're only and always doing the shlichus of Hashem. Hashem is creating the darkness. Hashem is creating the other side. Hashem is creating all the agents that are there to oppose us and to produce an engagement that's difficult. All the difficulties, etc., are coming, they know, from God himself. Like Bilam said, right, when Balak asked him to curse, he said, I can't do anything other than what God tells me to do. That's the spiritual clippers before they are invested in the body. Even though they're called other service, strange service, they call God the God of gods. And they're not able to transgress at all on God's will. Because they know and they grasp that God is their life. They owe their existence. The clippers and the spiritual clippers know that God is their life. The kiyumim and keeps them in existence. They know that they're getting their life from God, albeit the backside of the God, which we call the backside, because it's not panim, it's not face to face, it's not the pinimis. They know where they're getting their life from, but they know it's the backside of the Ratzon HaElyon, protocol of the supernal blessed will, Hamakif Aleihim, which encompasses them. It's just that, and they know this, that since it's a light from the sitra achra, from the backside, it's in a state, what's the it? The supernal, the or Ein Sof is in a state of galus. It's coming into the backside, like sort of a shadow game. But they're aware of it, that this chayas that they're getting is a state of galus within them. The hakshiv atzmon elokus, and gives rise to their experiencing themselves as something independent, and there is the seed that there is something independent, that there is something really independent. But this is the shadow. This is a darkened way of understanding things. This is the dark side, the backside, the gullus. But it can happen because if you're getting it in a way that's not penetratingly positive, you're getting it in a way that's darkened, it can lead one to think, and it develops the idea that in fact, that they consider them, they begin to think of themselves as independent. Like the governor was 1,000 miles away from the Kaiser and begins to act independently because not all the information is going back to the Kaiser. He thinks at least. So they stand on their own. They begin to think of themselves as elokus, as gods. And this is, of course, total denial of God's oneness. Nevertheless, in Kefrim, they don't deny Hashem. They're not denying Hashem completely, lagamri. They don't say that God is not. They call him the God of gods. Because the life force and the existence, the state of existence which is drawn to them and which descends to them, is coming, they know where it's coming from. Therefore, the clippers never transgress God's will. They're agents of God. I mean, this is the whole story, right? We're progressing. Why does God create these agents whose function is to darken the presence of God and make the presence of God ultimately difficult to discover? Well, this is the whole point of the advantage of the light which comes from darkness. Easy to say, but we need to talk about this a lot in order to really get this, that God has an intention in creating the Avodah Zorah. God himself has an intention in creating this notion of strange service or darkened elikus in order that we should be able to strengthen ourselves against it and bring out powers that we would not have if it weren't for the fact that there's opposition. Right, back to Basi Lagan Maimah, that when there's a battle to be fought, all the foot soldiers have to be armed and trained, and when they're trained and they overcome, they have a victory and a power that's much more powerful than the power they had before they engaged in the battle. All right, that's just a short digression, but I mean, there's a lot to be said about why is God himself creating these shluchei hamakim, right, messengers of him himself, who begin to experience themselves as independent and transfer that in the sense of independence down and down the chain until we have people and human beings on the planet who feel that there either is no God, or if there is a God, there's no point in worshiping him because the governor is calling the shots, not the Kaiser. And therefore, therefore, a person who transgresses God's will, the person is doing something worse than the clippers. The clippers know from whence they come. The human being who's doing Avodah Zorah has banished that or is invisible to that, and in that sense is worse and less than the clipper itself, than the sitra of the clipper, worse than the clipper, which is called Avodah Zorah and other gods. The person down here whose thought, speech, and action is completely enveloped in the strangeness, the strange gods, or a service of something strange, and just to keep this sort of current, there is a notion that there was a time in history when the great Kabbalists, the people who really knew the Torah inside out, were able to abolish the taiva for Avodah Zorah. Now that taiva for Avodah Zorah meant the taiva for bowing down to an idol. I was talking about this with some of my grandchildren at the table the other day. I said they can't understand, how could a person possibly think that you could bow in front of a piece of wood? All right, but there was this taiva, but that way of serving Avodah Zorah was banished. But we have other Avodah Zorahs. We have what the end is. The ends. What is the key to everything? Science is an Avodah Zorah. Technology is an Avodah Zorah. We have ideologies which become an Avodah Zorah. They prevent us from seeing through to the Hashem Echad, which is really behind everything. So anything that prevents one from seeing through to the Hashem Echad and causes one to serve and to be subjugated to, and in the realm of, and in the domain of something short of that, is, in quotes, a strange service, an Avodah Zorah. So if a person is full of those thoughts which are separating oneself from Hashem and involved in those things which are the things that one shouldn't be, that are not subject of the 365 negative commandments, so that creates a experience of a person which is called tachlis hapirud, complete separation from the oneness and the singularity of Hashem. More than the clippers. The spiritual clippers acknowledge, they know him. And so the person who's doing this, who has no acknowledgement of God behind everything, or even if he does, says, I don't serve him, I serve the governor, that person is denying in God's oneness more than the clippers themselves. That's for sure. As it says in Eitz Chaim, from the Arizal, Shalom Embeis, Soif Perak Dalit, if you want to look it up. Shehara Shebolam Hazeh, which is, this is what the Arizal says, that the evil which is in this world, Achumni, this coarse physical world, Ushmiri HaKlipa, Gases, is the dregs of these puffed up clippers. Who Taklis Habira, it's the end, it's the bottom, it's the sediment. When everything else is separated out, the guk that separates to the bottom, that's what this is. This is the clipper that exists in this physical world, and this thick clipper that blinds one to the reality either of God's existence or of, even if you have a sense of God's existence, that God has anything to do with anything. And I'm going to just talk to the governor. I mean, why I say put science on the table. There are many scientists who acknowledge God, but nevertheless, it can be, and I'm not putting all scientists in this bucket, don't get me wrong. There are many, many scientists who have acknowledged totally that the real mover and shaker is beyond the realm of scientific notation, right? But those who haven't can believe that there is a God, but God has distanced himself, and this is what we said earlier, and given over the power of movement, of creation, and all the forces to the lower realms, which can be explained according to notation and analysis and deductive and inductive reason. And because of the fact that this world, right, it says the Rishoyim Gavru boy, that as we're about to say, this world is a world where things are kashim v'royim. They're difficult and evil predominates. Rishoyim Goivrim boy. And the evil people are the ones who are predominant in this world, which I don't think you have to look too far to see that's going on. And on that high note, we end today's Tanya. So, what do we do with this one?
Could it be that fear and there were two things, anger. Well, anger, yes, they said is compared to Avodah Zarah, but fear also is a kind of Avodah Zarah.
Depends what you're afraid of. If you're afraid of, like the fish out of water example I always use, of being separate from Hashem because you know you're going to die, that's not an Avodah Zarah. But certainly a lot of fears are, fears of things that are imaginary, fears of things that you really have the power to control, and the fear itself becomes the cause of the disease. Yeah.
Fear itself, when I was reading the Tanya, I was reading it and thinking about Hashem's messenger fear, like fear itself as an angel.
Yeah, fear
like
can,
bad angel.
Yeah, it can be. But again, there's fear and there's fear. And there's Yiras Hashem, which is the fundament of the whole religion, as the Alter Rebbe said, Yiras Hashem.
Well,
that's the good
I'm talking
fear.
about the Zelumaz. I'm talking about the other side.
Yeah, correct. The Zelumaz fear can be, yes, in the Avodah Zarah, it can be a disease. Yeah. Maybe that's a good bechein. No, to bechein, so what? As Malkut could say, lochein. Therefore, I'm going to make a distinction. When I feel afraid of something, that's not godly fear. It's not the godly thing. I'm afraid of something, and it's producing anxiety in me. I'm going to think. Hey, if that's the result, that it's producing anxiety and it's producing something that's distancing me from embracing and feeling powerfully in love with God, that's l'umazet. I'm going to recognize it, and I know that I have the power within me from everything we've learned before to do battle with it, number one, and to overcome it, number two. And it can be very subtle. Go ahead.
There's a requirement to trust Hashem, to have bitachon, to trust, to surrender to Hashem, to trust in you're in Hashem's hands, to trust the process. Yeah. And sometimes the process can be, I'm just thinking the most extreme case, okay, the Jews in the cattle cars. Could they have possibly not allowed fear in, when they came out and the
Well,
Yamachshimans were yelling at them?
Well, many didn't allow fear. Those are the ones who prevailed in the camps. Even though they went to death, they prevailed with God on their lips. So there were many who didn't. You're right. Fear is, what is the book? Stranger in a Strange Land. It comes as a science fiction book, but I remember the line from there was very current amongst kids in the 60s. Fear is the mind killer. Fear is the mind killer. And if you live with fear, you're shrinking back and you're a victim and you don't know how to become unvictimized. So yes, the people in the cattle cars, some of them were totally afraid and some of them had bitachon. The same experience brought out totally two different midos.
Halva Elenu, so maybe that's my takeaway for today.
Yeah.
No, Halva Elenu, the midah of such bitachon that any, like our daily fears and anxieties should just, we shouldn't shrink away in fear. But what was the other thing you said?
Oh, I don't remember.
The opposite of shrinking away in fear and being a victim is just like walking in.
Yeah, walking in one with Hashem, walking in with bitachon, that Hashem is here. First of all, this is actually maybe helpful to derive from our lesson. Our lesson tells us that the klippos themselves, they know God, right? They know God, and they know that they are just agents of God. So when we come across things in our life that are, at first glance, pushing us into anxiety, pushing us into depression, pushing us into anger, we should also know take what they know. This is just a tactic that God is using, or the anxiety isn't. The experience that's causing the anxiety or the anger, etc. That experience, that situation is just a tactic. And I can take that situation one of two ways. I can allow it to produce my fall of thought, speech, and action into anxiety and anger and all those other negative things, or I can use it to say, brace myself, right? I am not going to allow that to happen. And if you do that, you're creating the musculature, the strength, the power to overcome the nisoyin.
Wow.
Yeah, so the nisyonos are there, is the question. And we have the ability, and when I say we, I particularly mean us who are learning this Tanya and all over the world, the people who are learning Hasidus and other aspects of the Torah. We know that we have something within us to not only fight that, but to conquer it. And that's the overpowering power of the Nefesh Elokis, which at the moment of being triggered, let's say, of being triggered into anger or depression or sadness, melancholy, at that moment, it's that powerful force of the Nefesh Elokis has been obscured. But we know it's there. And we know that this is just a test, that God is just creating all of this just to test us in order to bring out a greater strength from us opposing or being victorious in the battle. So maybe that's the takeaway. I mean, maybe. Why? Because we're talking here about the negativity, but there's a positivity in the negativity, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We always define nisayon as test, but really in modern Hebrew, it means a try, like Hashem is trying. It's an attempt to get us to do the right thing. He's trying again and trying again to get us to hear him.
There's also the touch in Hasidus, nes, like lifting up.
He's trying to lift us up. He's literally trying to lift us up.
Exactly.
With these triggers.
Absolutely. When you get triggered, I think we're getting somewhere here. When you get triggered, that should trigger, if we've been learning and taking to heart what we've learned, that should trigger, aha, this is an opportunity for me to get lifted up and to blast this thing apart. Yeah.
I would love to share something really quick. I think it just hammers in the Uvachain. I think it's relevant to the Parsha that we just had. It was in Rabbi Jonathan Sachs' book about the Parsha, where it says that when the Jews had to go and fight the war after they left Mitzrayim, that Moshe lifted his hands up And that before we left Egypt and before we jumped into the sea with faith, that we couldn't make free choice yet, and that we were still slaves. But once we made this jump, that we became free, that this was our first battle where we were going to actually have to fight for ourselves. So that the commentaries say, why did Moshe raise up his hands? And it says that when he raised his hands, the Jews were winning. And when he put the hands down, they would start failing. So was it Moshe that was actually empowering them to win? Like, was it really his hands? And it says that it's really because he was actually putting his hands up to remind them to look up and to remember that Hashem is in charge of everything. And that was what was helping them win, not that Moshe was actually making it happen. So that concept of constantly looking up and remembering God all the time through the challenges.
That's beautiful. And that's the two ends of the word Nisuyin, having a trial in order to lift me up. Yeah. Okay, I think this was nice. A good bechems. And we'll see you again tomorrow.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Bye-bye.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. Bye-bye.